So let's circle back to your practice real quick. So, you do criminal and PI. Did you always do both? How do they, what's the interplay? Do you do one more than the other? Are they good
Right.
complementary practices in your experience?
So I started out as a PI lawyer. I had no formal training as a criminal defense lawyer. I was never a legal aid lawyer. I was never a prosecutor. I was never mentored by a criminal lawyer. But in New Jersey, not New York. So this happened to be in New Jersey, and I didn't have an office there. I was just admitted. So I get what they make you do is you have to do one free case a year. And they don't care if you don't know what you're doing. So it's either going to be a criminal case or like a family court case, like a domestic violence. And I got mine, and the first one I got was a guy who I'm still really good friends with to this day. He was having trouble with his wife. She accused him of assault. So he had a criminal case and he had a domestic violence case, a final restraining order. And, I kind of dug into it. I wasn't getting paid, but I found it like pretty interesting. And I said, this is really kind of good for me to be a defendant, to help me be a better plaintiff's PI lawyer.
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins. This podcast where I get to interview founding partners, hear about their journeys, their lessons, and for today's guests, hear a lot of good, cool stories. I've heard some of them. This is going to be a good one. So not to set expectations too high, but I'm really excited about this because I've gotten to know today's guest this year, and I've been fortunate to hear some of these stories, and I want to learn more about them. So Stephen Goldstein today, welcome to the podcast. Stephen is a lawyer in New York and New Jersey. He's got a practice. He does some PI work and he does some criminal work. But Stephen, welcome to the show. Why don't you sort of give us some background on you? Tell us about your firm.
Sure, thanks. Thanks for having me on. So I have a pretty odd type of practice. I do criminal defense, New York and New Jersey, personal injury, New York and New Jersey. I kind of have almost two staffs. I have one staff that really just concentrates on New Jersey, another staff that concentrates on New York. I also don't really have, I've only had one associate in my career, which is 30 years. So the way I operate is I use a lot of contract lawyers, a lot of independent lawyers for court appearances, depositions, writing, brief writing, anything you could think of. I kind of thought of myself as like the general contractor. And when I need a plumber, I hire a plumber. When I need an electrician, I hire an electrician. I've had partners. Unfortunately, the partner I've had is not well. So we're transitioning out of that. And I've been at it, my own firm, since 1994. So I had 31 years. My journey was a little, I wouldn't say different, but I remember when I was in college and all my friends were going to law school, I was of the opinion that they're really doing it because they either want to keep partying or they have nothing better to do. And I was an okay student in college, but I said maybe I need the real world to beat me up a little bit. So instead of going right to law school, I started a journey on jobs. But going backwards, my grandfather was an entrepreneur and he had an incredible business. What he did was, so when you throw out your clothes in the bin, and you see like the Salvation Army bins or whatever, and they say it's for charity and you throw out your old clothes. Well, what he taught me is actually what happens to your clothes is they don't go to anybody. They get thrown into giant warehouses where people like my grandfather, starting in the 50s and 60s, would go and they would pick out the best stuff and they would buy it for 5 or 10 cents a pound. And what my grandfather did is he would buy jeans, whatever the good jeans in good condition were, and he would wash them, and he would literally then sell them to flea markets, people who ran flea markets in the South, Arkansas, Georgia. And you're from Georgia. And I learned his business because I would work for him in the summers. And he had always told me, don't ever get a job. He said, it's the worst thing in your life you could do is never work for anybody, get yourself a job. So I didn't follow his advice in college, after college. And I'd worked in various jobs. I'd done sales, I did public relations, and then I got a job at Madison Square Garden, which for any sports-minded person who grew up in New York like I did was the dream. And I worked there. We promoted the boxing matches. And this was in the mid to late 80s. And I got to meet some great people. My famous story is that Sugar Ray Leonard threatened to beat me up while we were out drinking because I was giving him a hard time and said, Thomas Hearns beat the crap out of you. And he was getting really mad because he was a little drunk. And then, after that, I wanted to go to law school. And the reason I went to law school is at the time I was working in a pharmaceutical advertising agency on Madison Avenue. And it was a small agency. And one day, some strange guy walks into the office, goes to the three corner offices, basically goes to these people who were all in their late 40s and 50s, you're out, you're out, you're out. And I was like, whoa, okay, these people are in their late 40s, 50s, they're running ad agencies, and now they're just thrown out on the street like nothing. And I said, this will never happen to me. And I literally went out and got the LSAT course, took the LSAT, and I went to law school. I think I graduated when I was 28, 29. I went to law school for the sole purpose of having my own law firm. Like, it was not, I want to get a big job. It was none of that. It was, I had a plan of about 1 or 2 years. I would work for somebody, but I better be able to try cases and I better get to court immediately. And I was able to do that. And that was,
So, I find there are people like you that always knew that you're going to start your own firm. And then there are others that sort of fell into it or were pushed into it for whatever reason. But I remember, so I want to talk about your firm in a minute, but I remember you telling me before you started your firm, you're working for a guy that basically you as an associate, you basically had to, eat what you kill or pretty close to it. And so, tell me that story. I mean, you had to hit the pavement, maybe literally, to get business.
So it's actually the backstory to this is, so when I was out of law school, my first job, I worked for AIG defending liability cases. And it was downtown in Manhattan. And early on in my career, I'd say 3 months, 4 months, I was doing a deposition at a guy in Brooklyn at a storefront. And after the deposition, he takes me in the back and he says to me, what can you get me on this case? And I'm like, I don't know. Well, what do you demand? He goes, well, I'll give you 10% of whatever you give me, whatever you get me. And I'm like, what do you mean you'll give me 10% of whatever I get you? It's like, well, you know how it works. You get me what I want. Somebody will come visit you. And I was like, really? I was like, I think I'm too early in my career to get involved in this kind of stuff. But there's a point to that story. I then got the brilliant idea of, I didn't want to go to New York anymore. I wanted to see what it was like to work in New Jersey. And I grew up in New York. I grew up in Brooklyn. I didn't grow up in New Jersey. And I somehow got a job at a firm that did commercial real estate. And I pretty much hated it. And I remember the day I knew I had to go back to the city was I was sitting outside. I was sitting in my office and a deer walked under my window. And I was like, what the hell am I doing? I grew up like, done. I need to get back into the PI world. I need to get back into the go to court every day world. And so for some reason, I had the brilliant idea of calling that guy and saying, by the way, I'm looking to get back into the city. Do you know anybody? And he wound up telling me, I kind of do. I know this guy, who's looking for an associate. And so I called this guy. His name was Gerald Miller. He was the first guy I really worked for, like in a small plaintiff's personal injury firm. And we talked about the job, and we talked, and he asked me, how I see a future. I was like, well, if I'm doing things right, I should have more cases than you in 2 years. And he was like, really? I was like, yes. I was like, I'll do the work now, but I intend on, and that kind
Well,
of stuff.
first of all, I love that attitude, man. That's badass. It probably
Well,
took him a little back there, huh?
so my grandfather had taught me, whenever you go on a job interview and somebody asks you questions, you basically tell them, you should hire me because I'm going to make you money. It doesn't, forget about the skill, and I see how it resonates now as an owner that, listen, if I interviewed somebody for an associate's job and they came to me and said, hire me because if you hire me, you're going to make money. Well, that sets my frame up as like, oh, he's not a cost. Now, this guy was, I guess, he was out of central casting. And I guess, unless you grew up in New York, you wouldn't be able to visualize this type of PI lawyer, but it was the old, and obviously in those days, it was very heavily Jewish laden, the plaintiff's PI lawyers. And he had been a PI lawyer for 30 years and never tried a case. He was afraid of his own shadow. He was afraid to spend a dime. And our salary negotiation was like this. I think your first year, you will make $45,000. Your next year, you will make $35,000. And then the next year, you'll make $20,000. And the next year, I'm not paying you a salary. I said, okay, tell me the backside. And the backside was a bigger piece of the pie as each year went on. And I said, pay me less the first year, but I want a piece of the action right off the bat. And he was like, great. And so I had some sales experience. I was not afraid to go out and ask for cases. I was not afraid to go out and sell. And the first year I was with him, I made over $100,000. And I would do things that are hard to do today. I mean, I would go to every IME. And at that time, there were a lot of insurance brokers on Broadway in Manhattan, uptown, like above 96th Street. And I would go out once a week and I would literally walk the pavement. And I would go in and I would give my card, I'd give my spiel. And from doing that, I got 3 or 4 guys who actually started referring me cases. And within 2 years, I had a bigger practice than he did. And he was older. And I had then partnered up with my first partner, Ed McGowan, who is now he's probably the best trial lawyer I've ever seen. He's the head of legal aid for all of Manhattan now. And he tries the wildest criminal cases that are almost impossible to get as a private lawyer because nobody would be able to pay. Would get into the situations that these people get in and actually have money also. And we started our firm, him and I, and the first week, Ed hit for $1 million on a trip and fall case in the Bronx. And that was in 1994. This was 2 years after I graduated law school. And eventually, Gerald Miller, who I worked for, he was pretty much out. After 2 years of me being there, he was like, I'm going to Florida for 6 months. And I basically took over all his cases. And he made more money the last 5 years of his career by me paying him than he ever made having his own practice. And
Wow.
that was kind of that was the start of it. And then it started branching in all sort of directions. But
That's awesome. A couple things there for any younger lawyers out there. Maybe you don't literally hit the pavement like you did, but get up from behind your desk. You got to do that. You got to meet people, and don't be afraid to ask. Ask for cases. Ask for work. A lot of lawyers are just scared to do that. It seems like.
Thank God. Thank God. And I still do a lot of this kind of stuff. So I do a lot of flesh to flesh. A little later on in my life, I became the mayor of my town. And that was an interesting story. I had moved into my town, I think in 1993, 94, whenever it was. And I just had some brilliant ideas. Like, let me go to the local political party meeting just to see what's going on. Just, maybe I'll get involved. I'll do something. So at the time, I was like 30, 31 years old. And this was in New Jersey, in the town I live in now, Springfield. And back then, again, because everything was, paper, there was no computers. And all across New Jersey, the political parties were run by these little old women who were the political powerhouses behind the scenes. So I went to my first meeting, and you got to understand, I'm like 30, 31 years old. Everyone else in the room is 60 plus. So when I walked in, it was like gasps, like, who is this person? And they're like, what do you do? I'm like, I'm a lawyer. Now, like, the gasps are getting even louder. And, meet the people, sit at the meeting. The next day I get a call. They go, you are now the lawyer for the library board. Like, the library board? What the hell do they need a lawyer for? Well, they have meetings, and they'd like to have a lawyer there. I'm like, okay, I'm now the lawyer for the library board. I'm like, okay, kick something on my resume. I can say, okay, now look, I'm also the library board lawyer. Fast forward 2 years, and every year there's an election. The way the government in my town works is the township committee. So there's 5 people on the board, and those 5, they choose who the mayor is. So there were 2 seats up, and they come to me. They're like, you're running for township committee. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I mean, I've been here for 3 years. I don't know anybody. And the guy I was up against was probably 70 years old, had been on the town council for 15 years. And I start now thinking in my head, okay, so they need me to go in and lose. But now when I do this, I think the way it works in politics is once you're the sacrificial lamb, they owe you. And now they'll start giving me like what you hear about in New Jersey, like the BS no-show jobs. Like I'll get some position with like some board and they'll pay me 30 grand a year and I never have to go or do anything because I'm running and they'll owe me this. And so I went out and I actually campaigned. And lo and behold, and the other thing I told them is, I said, by some miracle, if I actually win, I'm playing in a basketball league. And our games are Monday nights, and that's when the meetings are. And I'm like, I'm not blowing off my basketball league to be on the township committee. I mean, this was the attitude I had. I was 30-something years old. And lo and behold, I won. And I'm like, what the hell just happened? Like, this wasn't, I don't know how it happened. It happened. And I wound up winning 2 more elections. I did play basketball, though, that year. I did miss the meetings. I was true to my word. And, what's cool about being on the township committee in that town or the mayor is we have in our town Baltusrol Golf Club. So if you are a golf fan or a golf fanatic, that's one of the top 100 courses. And we get the PGA championship every 12 or 15 years. Just so happened we got the PGA championship when I was the deputy mayor. And it was in 1998. And my picture is in the PGA championship guide, the program. And that was the tournament where Phil Mickelson won on the 5th day because it was raining on the 4th day. And it was pretty cool. And literally one of the perks, that was one of the reasons I kept running, is literally because the perk of I got to play at Baltusrol, which in a million years I would never get to do. And I had a run of about 8 years on the board, and I've turned that into now I've been the public defender in the town for the last 10 years. And that's a political position. Believe it or not, it's a tougher fight to get that job than to get on the town council.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So let's talk about your firm now for a minute. You sort of said, it's unique. You've got contract attorneys. I can't remember the name, but I feel like there's some name for it, like the bench attorneys or something in New York.
Per diem.
Per diem?
Yeah.
So explain how that works. That's unusual to me, at least in Atlanta.
Right. And, when I met you and other people like you through the group that we're in, I was stunned that I was the only one who even knew this. So in New York, especially, in the 90s and 2000s and pre-COVID for certain, I was in court every day, literally every single day, because they would do settlement conferences, discovery conferences every single day. And in New York City alone, there's 5 courts. So I could have a case in Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, Manhattan, and I can't be everywhere, just one person. There are lawyers literally in New York City and New York State whose sole practice is to cover court for other lawyers. And what they do is they charge $100 and they'll appear on as many cases as you need. And you then realize they are better to go to court than you are because they know very intimately now all the judges, all the court officers, all the court clerks. And if you think about the economics of it, if I had to be at a conference at 9:30 in Manhattan and I got there at 9:15, you could literally sit till 1 o'clock in the afternoon because there's 100 cases on every day. And you've got per diem lawyers on the other side. And they're running to 3 or 4 different courtrooms in a given day in the same courthouse. So if you're sitting there, you could be sitting there waiting for your defense attorney till 11:30 for a 9:30 call. And none of the judges will call them on it because they know what's going on. Everybody's out hustling. So I determined pretty quickly I would go to court, but I would go to more of settlement stuff because and unfortunately you don't get it today like I did when I was a younger lawyer, because I really got to develop really close relationships with defense lawyers because I would see them every day and we would go to lunch. And because we're sitting there for 3 hours waiting for one case, you're BSing and you're really getting to know them. You know how they work. And it really, really helped resolve a lot of cases. So that became kind of like my business model. And I would say, my time is worth a lot more than $100 for me to do one conference. If I settle one case for $20,000 because I'm not sitting in a court, it's worth much more. And in New York City, especially New York City firms, you will find the big firms, literally the firms that have 30 or 40 lawyers, they don't send their own lawyers to court because they want their lawyers in the office, producing discovery or doing depositions. But I also used lawyers to do depositions. And one of the reasons I did, and especially I had them do defense depositions, and I would use ex-defense lawyers to do it. I was a small firm, and I always found that it was great to have a second set of eyes on my case. So those lawyers would look at the case, they would prep for a deposition, and afterwards or before they'd say, you should do this, 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 you should get that, that, that. They would then write these deposition reports for me, and they did a great job because what I have discovered over the course of my career is, and this is one of the little secrets nobody will say, but I don't have an ego, so I don't care. The way to make money as a plaintiff's PI lawyer is to get the case. And then any other factor of the case, you could always hire a better lawyer than you to handle. So there's better lawyers than me at discovery. There's better lawyers than me at doing depositions. There's better lawyers than me at doing trials. There's not a lot better than me at getting cases. I'm sure there are, but that's where kind of my ego goes to. I'm really good at getting business. But and the way I discovered a lot of my deposition lawyers would be the ones who I would be opposing. And if they impressed me, I would say to them, if you ever go out on your own, keep me in mind. I'd love to use you to help me on my cases. And so over the years, I built up a vast network of really, really talented lawyers who, they didn't want to work for a firm. They wanted to have their own freedom and, they were making a decent living. But when you do the per diem thing as a lawyer, you don't have the malpractice insurance is next to nothing. You don't have office staff. You have no overhead. You work when you want. And I found that financially and economically, it really, really worked out well for me. And I still do it to this day. In my New York cases, I don't go to court. I have other lawyers cover court for me. Pretty much almost do everything at this point. Literally, all I'll do is get the case and get the medical records. And if I got to file suit, that's kind of the last I see of it until it's ready to settle.
The thing that's crazy to me, the per diem, and I guess all the courts, everybody's on board with this, but like I just imagine down here, a lawyer makes an appearance at court and then they're scared they're in the case and can't get out. But I guess there's some arrangement where...
No, they're just appearing of counsel. So, obviously when they would appear, they'd be, Goldstein and Handworker, Jonathan Hawkins appearing for Goldstein and Handworker. But the culture is such that everybody understood. There was like that thought never entered my mind until you just said it, and I've been doing it for 30 something years. Like nobody even thinks, you know, that they are in the case because it's just like an associate appearing on behalf of the firm. It's the firm and somebody's just appearing on behalf. And that's how all these per diem lawyers would enter their appearances.
All right, so I want to go back. We're going to jump around a little bit, but I want to go back to Madison Square Garden. You know, I understand you're a huge Grateful Dead fan.
Love.
And they used to play there a lot. So you get to see them. Tell me about that.
So I saw them because I worked at Madison Square Garden 4 years, and the Dead would be there 12 to 15, maybe 10, 12 nights a year. And my office was literally, so Madison Square Garden is a weird building if you don't know it. The actual arena where they play is on the 5th floor of a building. You literally have to go up escalators or up elevators to get to where the actual basketball court or the hockey rink is or wherever they do. My office was on the 1st floor of that building. And I had the all access pass because I worked there. So I would literally go to every concert, and at intermission, I would go backstage and I would hang out backstage and I would be in my suit or whatever. One day, I don't know what came over me, but I wandered into the arena at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the Dead are doing their sound check. And the only people in Madison Square Garden at that time are me, about 5 or 6 cleaning women, and the Grateful Dead are doing their sound check for that night's concert. And they played 3 songs. And I got my own private concert. And I'm trying to think if you could even pay for that or could have paid for that in those days. But I mean, I would do stupid stuff. Like, my friends, I would sneak them in. It was, but I was the man, believe me. And
I bet.
I got to play basketball in the arena whenever the court was laid down, whenever the Knicks were playing, if there was college basketball. And that occurred on my first day on the job. Second day, I got a call from the CEO of Madison Square Garden. And at the time, this guy's name was Alan Fields. And Alan Field was a very interesting character. He was a very, very intense guy. And I was 23 years old. And I'm like basically a gopher for the boxing department. And Alan Fields calls me directly. He goes, "Steve, this is Alan Fields." And I'm like, why the hell is this guy coming? Like, is he welcoming me? And he says to me, he goes, "I hear you play basketball." Like, I do. He says, "Bring your stuff. You're going to go to the arena tomorrow at 1 o'clock. We're playing." I'm like, okay. And I go to my boss, who was a big name in the boxing world. His name was Bob Goodman. He was Don King's main guy for a long time. And then Madison Square Garden hired him to run the department. And I said, "Bob, like, Alan Fields just called me to play basketball tomorrow. What do I do?" And he said, "You go play basketball." And that started, 4 years of playing against, and this is in the mid 80s. So this is when, if you're a basketball fan, this is when the Knicks had, Mark Jackson, Patrick Ewing, Oakley. This is when they were really, and I used to get dressed in Mark Jackson's stall in the locker room before we would go play pickup games at 1 in the afternoon. So, for a kid growing up in Brooklyn who was really into sports and into basketball, I was like, how could it ever get better than this? But I was making $18,000 a year. So at some point I figured, okay.
Well, you were saving a lot of money on the tickets you did.
I was saving a lot of money on the tickets. Yeah. Yes, I was. But one thing it did do is, when I was introduced, I met a lot of fighters, a lot of boxers. And I think it started me on my sort of the way I handled people as a lawyer now, because boxers are the most humble of athletes. I'm even talking like the big names. So a guy like Ray Leonard, who I actually got to know pretty well. Now, this is at the time, I mean, he was a little past his prime, but you're talking a guy, gold medal. It was Ray Leonard. He was like huge. But Ray Leonard was a very down-to-earth guy. And I always felt with boxers, say, unlike basketball players, any team sport player, when they're younger and they're good, when they're 10, 11, if they're good boxers, nobody cares. Unlike, if you're a good basketball player at 8, 9 years old, already you're being catered to. And boxing, too, is a very humbling endeavor. I mean, you're getting punched in the face, basically. That kind of humbles people. And I don't care how good you are. And I said to myself when I became a lawyer, I was like, if these guys can be humble in the face of what they face, like, who am I when I'm dealing with a client who, doesn't come from any sort of background, privileged background? Who am I to have airs or to think I'm any better? And I think that was a big part of why I do get cases and repeat cases from people. Is I'm really not phony. I really try and talk to them like they're just people like me. Like I am no better. And my office is on Madison Avenue in Manhattan, and it seems that, but I'm in the worst building on Madison Avenue, but I have the Madison Avenue address, so people, they get, it's a big deal. But it really taught me a lot about dealing with people, is that aspect of my life.
So back to basketball. I mean, did you played growing up? Did you play professionally? Was it
I played
overseas?
Yeah, I played in England 1 year. So I had gone my junior year of college. I studied abroad in London, and I was playing I was playing 4 or 5, days a week, and I was looking to play. And again, it was only magazines. There was no online stuff, and there was an ad in a magazine for a team that was looking for players. And I went down, I tried out. I was the only American who tried out. And as soon as they heard me talk and I was able to play, I mean, I was a good schoolyard player, but I went to Lincoln High School, and I mean, these guys were almost pros in high school. Every starting five of my senior year, every single person went Division I except for one, and he went Division III. And Stephon Marbury's brother played in high school. And
Yeah, Marbury, by the way. Yeah, so I'm Georgia Tech guy. He came down his freshman year and changed the team. We were good.
Right. So, yeah, Stephon Marbury went to my high school, grew up in the neighborhood I grew up in. And so I made the team and got a stipend to play, traveled and I was 19 years old at the time, and traveled all over Europe playing basketball for nothing. Went to France, Greece, Italy, Yugoslavia at the time. It was still a country. And obviously, I mean, I always say that my life peaked at 19 and went downhill after that, even though it's been a pretty good life. But I mean, I was really cool. I had an earring, I had hair, I was playing basketball. I was living in London in the West End. I was really cool. And then, I had to grow up.
That's awesome. I mean, you got all sorts of good stuff. You've been in a movie, right?
Yes. So I not an actor. I play piano. I've been playing the piano since I'm a kid. And about 4 or 5 years ago, a good friend of mine, his friend was producing a documentary, which is on Amazon and Netflix now. It actually won the Emmy from 2022 for Best Documentary. And he had asked me to play a piano piece in the, I guess when you watch documentaries, you don't realize it, but there's all this stuff going on in the background, and there's all this music. And he gave me a piece by a Polish composer from the 1930s. The name of the movie was They Survived Together. And I played the piece for 1 minute and 10 seconds in the movie. And I'm on the credits at the end where, you know how the credits, they roll slow, and then they start moving so fast you can't even read them. That's where my name pops up. But the guy who produced it was a guy I'd known for a long time, and he won the Emmy Award. The film won it. And his name was John Rakosny. And I said, John, am I allowed to say that I won an Emmy Award? And he goes, yes, you could say you won an Emmy Award. So when I've had a few drinks in me and I'm trying to impress people at a bar, I'll always tell them I won an Emmy Award for playing in a movie.
And every few years you get a royalty check for a few cents.
No, because I did not get paid to do it. It was, it was a documentary, so they basically have no money. They basically raised money to produce it, but it was a great movie. I mean, the movie's about a family in Poland where it's five kids. They were the only ones where the family completely survived the Holocaust. They were the only family in their town, and it was great. I mean, it's a great movie. I mean, I would recommend anybody. It's on Netflix, Amazon Prime. I think it's all over, but it was a really good movie. But that was, quite an experience. And I'm a little older, and I'm kind of looking back at my life, and I'm like, wow, I really did do a lot of cool stuff. But again, I think it makes you a better lawyer. I think the more rounded you become, I think it really, does help. People say they love the law and they're really hyper focused on it. I mean, I love being a lawyer. I mean, I love what it's given me. I love the freedom I have. I love the life I've been able to make for myself. I love the people I've met. But I'm on the other side of building. So I now am going through wow, how much longer do I have while I still have my health and I still have energy and but I'm at that stage. So I'm trying to develop these other things. So I started taking piano lessons again. I'll look into maybe teaching. I do, for the last 15 years, I go up and I lecture at Cornell University. My friend, the guy who introduced me to the guy who produced the movie, he's a professor at Cornell for the last 20 years. So I go up and I lecture his class. And it's interesting what I do with them. So he teaches a law class in the hotel school at Cornell. And I basically, for the last 10 to 12 years, have been using them as a really, really, really smart focus group. And so literally, he has 100 kids in the lecture hall, and he brings me in to talk about tort law. And basically, the first time he said, just tell me tell them war stories. So like what I'm teaching them is brought to life. And I did that for the first 2 years. And then I think by accident, I had a case. I think it was an Uber case or something, and it had to do with the person should have never been allowed to drive Uber, and there were technical issues, and Uber was defending the case on these technical issues. And I said to the class, I said, here's their defense, because either they couldn't figure out that the guy maybe had a criminal record, whatever it was, I can't remember. But I do remember these kids start laughing and saying, oh no, they can't say that. It's so easy. They could have done blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, what? And I mean, I had hired experts to look at this. And these kids at Cornell, obviously. And I wound up going back, talking to the Uber lawyers, and I settled the case for a lot of money. And I said, whoa, this is pretty cool. Let me start. I'll tell my war stories. But so what I would do is I would then take the lecture class and I would divide them in two groups, plaintiff and defense. And I would just give them the facts of the case and let them have at it. And as you can imagine, it's tough to say that this is your average person in the community because these kids are all brilliant. But boy, did I get a lot of great stuff from them over the years when I would have trials. So, I mean, one of the things you could do if you're a younger trial lawyer is, go to your local college and, go to one of the departments and say, I'd like to come in and just talk to your class. If there's a pre-law class, let me go in and tell a war story. And what it also could do is, so they were in Cornell, I was in the city, but if you do it at a local college, what a great way to find an intern, or what a great way to find someone to work for you and have use community relations. And, that morphed into more focus groups. And the way I do my focus groups now is, a few years ago, I went to the guy that I have my lunch in almost every day in my town. He owns the pizza place. And I said to him, what's your slowest night of the week? And he goes, Mondays. I said, you know what? I want to do my focus groups in the pizza place on Monday nights. Like, great. So I hired a mom from town that I knew. She's a paralegal at a defense firm locally. She took over and she went out and she would find me just by ads on Facebook. She would find me people to sit on my focus groups. I now have a waiting list of about 200, and people call her all the time. Can I be on the focus group? Can I be? And what I do is I just literally, I get 10 people. We go to the pizza place. They get there. We email them with the menu. They pre-order. They sit down at 7. I give them dinner. I give them a thick, heavy Italian dinner. So by the time they're ready for me, they're all, they can't move. They have to sit there and they have to pay attention. And, we go for 2 hours and I'll present usually one criminal and one personal injury case. And what it has done, which I didn't realize but morphed into, it's great community relations, great referral source. Because if you think about it, I've now presented trials probably in the course of all of I've done, probably about 300 people. So now these are 300 people who've kind of seen me in action. They have an affinity to me because I've given them something for nothing, and I feed them, and then I give them each $50, and they go on my mailing list, they go on my newsletter list. And there's a whole other side we haven't talked about, but marketing and how you can do it if you're a say a younger lawyer. There's so many things you could do locally, and it's a win-win because now I'm seen as like, okay, I'm this guy helping out the local business, and obviously he's really happy because he's got 15 dinners he's serving that he wouldn't do, and he's got customers who may not have ever come in there. So it's a win-win, and I really enjoy it because I like the guy and I want to see him do well.
That's awesome. That's a great idea for people out there. Real quick, thanks for listening. If you're getting any value out of this podcast, please take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. It would really mean a lot to me. Now back to the show. So let's circle back to your practice real quick. So, you do criminal and PI. Did you always do both? How do they, what's the interplay? Do you do one more than the other? Are they good complementary practices in your experience?
So I started out as a PI lawyer. I had no formal training as a criminal defense lawyer. I was never a legal aid lawyer. I was never a prosecutor. I was never mentored by a criminal lawyer. But in New Jersey, not New York. So this happened to be in New Jersey, and I didn't have an office there. I was just admitted. So what they make you do is you have to do one free case a year. And they don't care if you don't know what you're doing. So it's either going to be a criminal case or like a family court case, like a domestic violence. And I got mine, and the first one I got was a guy who I'm still really good friends with to this day. He was having trouble with his wife. She accused him of assault. So he had a criminal case and he had a domestic violence case, a final restraining order. And, I kind of dug into it. I wasn't getting paid, but I found it pretty interesting. And I said, this is really kind of good for me to be a defendant, to help me be a better plaintiff's PI lawyer. And so what I did, and I was a young lawyer when I did this, and when I tell young lawyers even now to do this, they look at me like I'm crazy. So usually the veteran lawyers, the guys who are out there 15, 20, 25 years, they don't want to deal with this crap working for free. They got law firms to run. So I went to other lawyers because you're allowed to slough off your obligation. So if Jonathan Hawkins gets the notice to appear pro bono for somebody, he could have somebody else do it for him, and Jonathan Hawkins gets the credit. So I would go to people like Jonathan Hawkins and say, hey, if you got a pro bono case criminal that you don't want to do, give it to me. And I kind of learned that way. And I was smart enough as a young lawyer, when I would have a case, especially criminal, I would go to the prosecutor and say, look, you got to help me here. I really don't know what I'm doing. What should I do? And 9 out of 10 times, you would be shocked that they would tell me what to do. They would say, you should make a suppression motion in this case. You should, because, part of being a good lawyer is being a little vulnerable. And a great skill is to admit when you don't know what to do. Because what happens is, I think most people are wired when somebody genuinely, sincerely comes to you and says, I need help. I'm trying to do my best, but I really they do it. And even bigger help are legal aid or public defender attorneys who will go out of their way to talk you through a case, because the people who do it full time, they really are zealots in the belief that, they're the last bastion of defense against, the system. And they want to see all criminal lawyers not only do well, but do it competently. And I did it enough times that I actually started getting pretty good at it. And, you know, criminal defense makes you a better PI lawyer in a number of ways. Like PI, it's negotiation. I mean, you're negotiating, different things. You're not negotiating money. You're literally negotiating people's time in prison or probation. I think there's a lot more at stake. But as a criminal defense lawyer, your job is to just poke a hole everywhere you see it potentially to occur. And I know as a plaintiff's personal injury lawyer, a lot of times, I'll be on listservs or I'll talk to others and they'll say, yeah, this insurance defense lawyer, he's a pain in the ass. He's asking me for this, that. And it gets them actually angry, or it gets them, it throws them off. And none of this stuff throws me off anymore because I know what they're doing and they're not doing it to be jerks. I mean, listen, some of them might be, but, very few. I mean, most insurance defense lawyers or PI defense lawyers that I met, I genuinely like. They're good people. They're doing a job. And if their job is to poke a hole in my case, why would I get angry at that? Or why would that frustrate me? All it means is if I can if I can stop them from poking that hole, it's just going to help my case get better. And the criminal defense made me a much better PI lawyer. It also really grounds you on how important it is when you're representing somebody. And I've developed very close relationships with my criminal defense clients because I think if you care, that's generally the nature of what should happen. You really should care at a gut level, at a personal level, if you're going to go in there and, represent somebody on a criminal case. Now, it happens on a personal injury case too, but it's kind of different in the sense that level, it almost doesn't occur unless you really go in a trial. And then you really, really got to dig in. But, your basic auto accident case with a minimum policy where somebody has an injury where they're going to pay the policy, you can't be close with everybody. But, this is why I believe, even if it's a limited amount, if you're a younger personal injury lawyer, even if you got to volunteer, take a criminal case, see it through, and I promise you, it's going to affect your ability at trial, and it's going to affect your ability at empathy for your client.
Well, the other thing, another story you told me, sometimes you need to have both skills. So I call it the jaywalking case, which was both a criminal and a personal injury case, right? That's an incredible case.
Yeah, that
Maybe give us a quick overview of that.
That was the most memorable case I've probably had in my career. So the long story short is we get a call from a guy that his 70-year-old father is sitting in Rikers Island, which is a notorious place in New York City. It is awful. It is the worst place. It's scary to go there as a lawyer. Forget about being a prisoner. And he's a 70-year-old man, and he's being held on a charge of endangering the life of a police officer. So, I get this call, and I'm like, okay, $1,500, $2,000 case, blah, blah, blah. So it turns out what had happened is this poor guy had been hit by a police scooter, knocked upside down, rendered unconscious. And to cover themselves up, the officer charged him. The officer who hit him charged him with endangering the life of a police officer. So they hauled this guy off to jail. He was there until he retained us. He was there for 5 days. He was in so much pain, and he got no medical attention. He was in so much pain that what he told us is the other inmates would take their sandwiches, and they combined their sandwiches to make a pillow for him. Now, you're talking about a guy who never had been arrested. He was living here his whole life lawfully. Spanish guy, didn't speak English. And I suddenly realized, wait a minute, I've got a PI case here. The long story short of it is the guy had a broken neck and he wound up getting 2 fusions. So I was defending the criminal case and I had a personal injury case going along. And they kept prosecuting the criminal case. And the district attorney, and this was in Brooklyn, they kind of don't know what's happening on the civil side, and the civil side has no idea. But as they keep, besides the personal injury case, I have a malicious prosecution, false arrest. I've got the whole gamut going. And every time I would walk into the criminal court, I would tell the DA or the prosecutor, well, they're called DAs, but most of the country calls their people prosecutors, so I'll say that. I would say to him, you know, the fact that you're continuing this criminal case, I thank you. My children thank you. My unborn grandchildren thank you. My unborn great-grandchildren thank you. And my unborn great-great-great-grandchildren thank you. And he had no idea what I was talking about. So cut to they wouldn't dismiss his criminal case. They insisted he take a plea of some sort. I said, it's not happening. There's no way. And we get to the trial of the criminal case. And the way it works in New York, when you're going to trial on a criminal case, is again, you have one judge and there's a billion cases on, and they're just cycling through, and everybody's getting these, what they're called adjournment and contemplation of dismissal, where basically stay out of trouble 6 months and case gets dismissed. They offer that to me there. I reject it. Judge says to me, like, what are you doing? And I now start telling the judge the facts of the case. He calls this poor line district attorney and says, get me your supervisor. And he goes ape wild on them. And he says, I'm sending you out to try the case right now. And at that point, they then said, okay, Judge, we'll reduce it to jaywalking, which is now just like a ticket. I said, no. We go try the case. The trial judge has the same attitude. Oh, and 10 seconds before they do their opening statement, they say, oh, we have to disclose to you that we're not calling the cop because he was fired 2 years ago because he pulled his gun on 3 other cops over 3 other occasions. I said, okay, it's an interesting fact. But that judge let me cross-examine the people from the police department like nobody's business. There was not a question. I could have asked them, what they had for breakfast 5 days ago, and that judge was, overruling every objection. I mean, I could have asked, and so what I did, I was able to get great deposition stuff because it's a trial. Also, because I had the criminal case going, so what the city of New York does is they're notorious for holding back discovery in civil cases. But in the criminal case, they don't hold back anything. So I have all this stuff that the civil side is telling me doesn't exist, but I got it from the criminal case. But the civil people have no idea I have it. So, when we go to, so the civil lawyers now, so I get an acquittal, obviously, and it was tried as a jaywalking case, the first one that had been tried since 1935 or something, like some crazy, So we go to the civil side, and we go to the first settlement conference, and we're all sitting in there, and I say to the lawyers representing the city of New York, I am, are you aware that your guy was fired for, and all these things that they have no idea? I'm like, how do you know that? I was like, well, you guys didn't know that my guy was criminally prosecuted for this. So I have all this juicy discovery that I'm not giving you because it's yours. And the judge kicks them out, kicks me out. And, we eventually came to like a multi-million-dollar settlement. And the crazy thing is had they been honest from the jump, there was video of my guy crossing the street on his phone. And I was worried about liability. If they had just, when he was hit back then, not obviously arrested him, just treated it like any other personal injury case, I probably would have gotten a 10th of what I got. But, in that case, made the newspapers, but it kind of had it was a very sexy case. It had everything. And this guy was brilliant, took his money, moved back to, I think, Ecuador, bought a house on the beach, and lived happily ever after.
That is crazy. I love that story. So we've been going at it a while, so I want to be respectful of your time. But you mentioned earlier that you're sort of getting to the stage of your career where you're starting to think about what's on the other side. So you're developing, redeveloping your hobbies and whatnot. But as you look back over your 30 plus years, and if any young lawyer was coming to you Are there any pieces of advice maybe you give them about starting a firm, starting their career, marketing, whatever it is?
I would say first, you need to get a mindset, even if you're an associate, that the only way you're ever going to really make it as a lawyer is you must get into the client acquisition mindset. You have to understand that, as in any business, the highest paid people are the revenue generators. Now, I'm not saying don't go out and study how to be a great trial lawyer and don't, you know, obviously you got to do your CLEs and learn. But so you need to take an interest in sales. You need to take an interest in marketing. And you need to always be curious and creative on how can I make myself put out there so I can learn how to market it, how to sell. Me, for instance, now I've paid $2,500 recently for an online sales course. Sales, not law, literally sales. Because so much of what we do as lawyers is sales. So don't ever think that sales is beneath you. I think the best lawyers and probably the wealthiest are all salesmen or saleswomen, salespeople, whatever we're called. At some point, you need to go out and join groups that are concentrating on marketing, that are concentrating on sales, and surround yourself with people with an abundance mindset. I actually did a post on LinkedIn this morning because on my listserv, everyone was complaining about Morgan and Morgan, which I'm sure everybody, they spend all this money. Blah, blah, blah. I said on my post, I said, look, nobody could compete with you. You're a unique person. You're yourself. Find your identity. Find your personality, because nobody else can be that. And then learn how to market it. Learn how to blog. Learn how to make videos. Once you get a lead, learn how to sell them. Learn how to be empathetic. But your goal must be that no matter how good of a lawyer I am, I want to be better at bringing in the business. And now I was lucky because I had that mindset from the get-go because I had an entrepreneurial grandfather. I didn't go through the growing pains of I'm going to be a good lawyer and then all of a sudden, oh my God, what do I do? I took an interest in that stuff before I even went to law school. But you almost have to, because anybody who studies this, anybody who's in the world of lawyers who are entrepreneurial knows just because you do a good job at something, doesn't mean people are going to recognize you or find you. I have a buddy, really good friend of mine I went to law school with about 5-6 years ago. He hit a case against New Jersey Transit for $17 million. And I had dinner with him and I gave him all these ideas of how he could use this, for marketing. And he wasn't the marketing mindset. And he just thought, this case appeared in the New Jersey Law Journal. People are going to call me. No. Now, could he have packaged that content into a great video, a great blog, posting on LinkedIn every day to how I did this? You really, really have to understand that even if you're an associate, you're the owner of a law firm. That's what you do for a living. You're the chief marketer for a law firm. Actually doing the legal work is sort of like the deliverable. It's the difference between owning the bar and being the bartender. And you could be both, but to me, if you're a young lawyer, get out there and learn how to market and sell. And you'll be guaranteed nobody will ever be able to walk into your office and say, you're out, you're out, you're out. And if they do, you say, great, new opportunity.
Great advice. We'll end it with that, Stephen. Man, that was awesome. If anybody out there wants to get in touch with you, refer you a case in New York or New Jersey, whatever, what's the best way for them to find you?
My website is www.gh, like Goldstein Handworker, Law, nynj.com. Just leave us a message there. You can fill out a form. Our phone number is there, 212-679-1330. That's the general number. And, happy to talk to people about any cases or just talking about, if anyone's interested about talking about marketing or sales. I like, Jonathan too. Love talking about it.
And if they want to come up there and play golf, you're always game.
I'm always game. I'm going to be playing golf in about 1.5 hours after we're done with this. On this beautiful day at the Jersey Shore. Or beautiful afternoon.
Well, Stephen, man, this has been awesome. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.lawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.